But I think Sarah Sutton, so...
Yes, I thought you were meant to be Sarah Sutton. Well, she's very quiet
and she's
and
very
demure.
quiet.
So we're going to sit there and be quiet.
But I also had a real question. So for Peter Davison, what was it like kind of going back into Doctor Who for Time Crashes? I absolutely love that. That is so unbelievable. I could watch that over and over and over again.
What?
But so what did it feel like to just be like in the costume again and like be on the set of Doctor Who?
Well, I couldn't quite do the jacket up.
I noticed that actually.
Yeah. And the trousers were the ones that they had to cut. When I finished Doctor Who, Colin Baker started off obviously in my outfit, and in order for him to fit into my trousers, they had to cut a big V out of it. So the trousers, amazingly, was far too big for me because that V was still in there. It was fine. It was great, but I mean, it was odd because it was someone else's TARDIS. You know, the TARDIS we had was wheeled in and out of the studio every 2 weeks, and it was sort of, but it's true, I wish it wasn't. So it was built and it was all a bit sort of, had a certain non-permanence about it, whereas the...
Wibbly-wobbly.
Wibbly-wobbly. And the TARDIS in Cardiff was a standing set, so it was, but it very much felt like sort of David's territory, so I was suddenly sort of worried about. In fact, I did. One moment when we were going around the TARDIS pressing all the buttons, just before we bumped into each other, I moved the only lever that he had a definite use for, and he got round to it and he went, "Who's moved my lever?" I said, "But it has to be me, doesn't it? I have to own up because I'm the only other person here." And apparently it was the only lever that he had a definite use for. Which I think with my gowns actually, didn't we? We had the lever that was for opening the door, and everything else was just the buttons we would press randomly to confuse the sound man. And they came to dump the sound in afterwards. But it was fantastic. I wish it had been a bit longer. Yeah. When it finished, it was sort of, sorry, that you said, we got tangled up here. When it finished, I think we had a fit. You just stop whipping me, what's that? Stephen thought he'd written something that was going to run about 12-15 minutes, and I think it only ran about 8 or something, because we spoke so quickly. So I think he wished that he'd written a bit more, so we filled up more time. But it was fun. It was great.
My question is, I was at an earlier panel when we were talking about the chaotic nature of filming during your era. And also remembering during the times of the first 2 Doctors when the show was a serial format and they were doing basically a show, an episode a week for almost 6 weeks. And my only question was the fact of, if you could have had an opportunity, or if you could imagine the opportunity, would you still worked in your time period, or how would it have been like if you worked during the early 60s when they were doing the basically the serial format,
I really liked the early Doctors. I mean, I thought that they were unencumbered for the most part by special effects. If you think about it, I think at some point in our time of Doctor Who, they sort of tried to overreach themselves a bit in terms of the special effects they were hoping to achieve, and we did spend an awful lot of time on those effects. You know, we got very excited about what the limits of the technology that we had, and we would try to push those limits. But the great thing about the early Doctor Who is they never tried any of that. It was all sort of it was more an atmospheric kind of program, and they didn't have the effects to do it. So it's a way in which I probably would have liked working like that. But I see it, you know. But that was 50. Was it 50? How many episodes did they do?
I don't know. 26 a year, I thought.
Oh, I didn't think it was ever more than that. Was
no.
It 26.
Yeah.
So I got a bit tired sometimes by the amount of time that we wasted trying to achieve fairly average effects, which is why we quite often pushed towards the end of our filming day, because we always stopped bang on 10 o'clock, and sometimes we didn't finish, and then all hell will break loose. So I think maybe things would have been more comfortable if we sometimes less ambitious. But all in all, you know, we had a good time.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Ish.
It's pretty rubbish answer, isn't it? But you know, it's the best I can do. So, thank you.
It was a bit rubbish, that answer. Right. So it was not me, that was Sarah Sutton. My
The question I have for you is sort of based on the whole idea of, I guess, showrunners become a big new term. Maybe that's more, you know, as people become more savvy about how television is produced and the idea, the role of the main producer. So you, of course, your era is really all shaped by John Nathan Turner. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
he came in, sort of clean house, and then brought all of you in. You know, and so I guess I was kind of curious to know, from having worked with him that entire time, you know, basically, what were the best parts, do you think, that he brought to the show for that era? And maybe what were some of the parts you think he could have maybe done a little better, or could have focused on?
Well, he was a fantastic, his strength was he was a fantastic publicist, really. He got enormous amounts of publicity for the show. It seemed to me that not a week went by without us doing some protocol somewhere. So that was very much what he wanted to do with the show. And I think sometimes that took precedence over maybe the best casting ideas that he had. I think he very much wanted to get people in who would have had a public image or a public persona that he could somehow exploit in terms of publicity.
Like the Captain in Earthshot, perhaps? Or?
Beryl Reid, you mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know...
The thing about John, I think, was that I always felt that John was really a variety producer. You know, that his heart was in variety, because he loved song and dance, and his long-term partner was a dancer. And I think that he was the youngest producer at the time that the Bee had ever had, I think, wasn't he? And I think that therefore he tended to sort of involve himself in, you know, he was like the new and coming generation got themselves involved in every aspect of things. And so John was very much a, you will do this. And was certainly, from my point of view, and we used to argue. I mean, I would have huge arguments with John about costume and character and all those kinds of things, which I invariably lost. And we were very fond of each other, but we used to fight like cat and dog, you know, as when we were working together, because I disagreed with a lot of his feelings about the way my character went.
I want to just follow up just a bit, particularly what you just mentioned, the whole, how you kind of view then the female companion. Does that kind of surprise you?
Well, I think he was striving to make the companions, give the companions an identity. I just think he went about it in a sort of a strange way, or maybe not a strange way, just the wrong way actually. So, for example, you know, Turlo, he just wanted to have he thought he'd make a companion interesting by having him try to spend the entire time trying to kill me. And in the end, that proved not to be very interesting. Very frustrating for Mark, because we would have to lock him up in episode 1 and not let him out until episode 4. Otherwise, why wasn't he trying to kill me? So in a way, he had a sort of very superficial way of making the companions interesting. And what I found good about the new series is they found a much better way of making them interesting, which is to actually treat them like sort of human beings, characters in their own right. And in fact, you know, it's arguably the first, when Doctor Who returned, the central character was in fact Rose, rather than the Doctor almost. And that made for the first time, I think, a sort of three-dimensional, two-dimensional, whichever you want to say, companion. It was very difficult. They were trying. I think he was trying his best to make interesting. Make the companions bring them up. It was just not done the right way, I don't think. Thank you.
That's very good of you. Thank you.
No, Do you know what I mean? He wasn't making,
he
wasn't
was.
developing the way they were writing the characters. He just gave them sort of...
Because they were, he gave them ticks, what I'd call a tick, instead of giving them a real character. And so, because a character is what you do, not what you say you do. And a lot of the stuff, I mean, I think I was lucky in that I at least got to have like a reasonably interesting thing. You know, A, I was the only Australian, and B, you know, that I got to be a bit cranky and all those kinds of things, and also he was quite a funny character, I think. But I just think that I don't think, to me, John didn't truly understand drama, if I'm honest. He didn't. He really, what he loved and what he was good at was understanding pizzazz and showbiz and all that kind of, you know, musicals and things like that. And that's where his passion was. And I think that he found himself in drama by accident. And that wasn't really where his strength was.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, Sarah, you've done that well.
It's interesting. Obviously, I cast me, so I was very pleased. I thought he was brilliant. I thought he was a genius. One of my favourite television programmes, so I thought, oh, this man. The thing that fascinates me about him is that he was fascinated by show business stuff, but also by soap opera. He loved the series Dallas. He actually adored Dallas. And I think he wanted Doctor Who to be huge. I mean, he wanted it to be huge everywhere in the world and everything. And yet, not so much when we were in it, but certainly later on, the series became stranger and stranger and stranger, and more of an acquired taste. If you happen to have that particular taste, and I pretty much did, then it's actually really interesting and strange and smart. Some of Sylvester's programmes are very, very odd. And you either find that exhilarating and peculiar in a good way, or it just puts you off. But I was very interested by this contradiction between a man who wanted to have things very big and yet made the series, as it ran through 7 or 8 years, stranger and stranger. He also had this very odd habit of putting his characters, his Doctor Who's and his companions, in these uniforms. They never wore clothes. They wore these outfits. I spent 2 years in Doctor Who in a pair of pyjamas. I spent half the time in an air stewardess's uniform. You know, Peter wears this bizarre cricket thing with the celery stuff to him. And Colin wears this screeching great multicoloured shout of an outfit. But I found this habit, and Baker spent 6 years stalking around in this bohemian thing that you might have found in Oxfam, in a charity shop. And then John suddenly sticks him in this wine red thing that's totally a television design. It's not a set of clothes anymore, it's become this costume. I always found that slightly odd. But I have to say, you know, that obviously, you know, he gave me the best acting job I ever had, or my favourite acting job, not necessarily the best. But anyway, I liked it. And so I sort of think he does some quite good stuff. I think he's quite brave. And also, it isn't just him. I mean, Eric Saywood, I think, was a very good Doctor Who writer. And of course, their relationship was terrible. But well, it was, wasn't it? But he was. I think Eric Saywood actually had a very strong sense of Doctor Who. And I think scripts like The Visitation, Earthshock, these are really good Doctor Who. And so I think there was quite a lot of good stuff. You don't have to applaud.